We have gotten a ton of Dragon Quest remakes, and that's great. But where are my Final Fantasy remakes? Hey friends, it's Just the Gems, I'm Brandon, and I know what some of you are thinking, and maybe already typing into the comments box. Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's a game. You can go buy it right now. It has a sequel, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Yes, I personally love those games. I think they're great, but that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about Final Fantasy remakes, especially in the vein of recent Dragon Quest remakes. Last week, when you're watching this, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D Remake will have released, and you will have all gotten a chance to play it, I hope, by now. If not, pick it up. It's great. See my review for more information if you're curious. But I loved Dragon Quest 1 and 2. I loved what they did with Dragon Quest 1 and 2. So Dragon Quest 1, as you might be aware, is one of the earliest JRPGs ever made. Certainly was the first one I ever played. You could debatably argue that it's the first one to ever see the light of day in the West, right? So Dragon Quest was a very simple game in terms of its story. Basically, rescue the princess from a dragon, save the kingdom from an evil dragon lord. That was it. There wasn't a lot of characters, named characters, there wasn't a lot of drama in the story. It was pretty cut and dried, straightforward, simple, very simple. Dragon Quest II was quite a bit more complicated. It introduced a party of characters that had personalities and names and histories. But, despite being kind of a big step forward for the time, compared to games nowadays, it's still pretty basic, pretty simple. The Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remakes have taken those games, and rather than just kind of giving us a presentation of the same stories with better graphics and more quality of life features, it actually went through and richly re-envisioned them from the ground up. So now Dragon Quest 1 contains a bunch of new characters, a bunch of new events, things for you to do along the path of the journey to fight the Dragon Lord. There are more stops along the way. More interesting things happen. They took the time to really go through and reinvent it. The same with Dragon Quest 2. Not only are there, more characters and more events in the story, they even went in and added a fourth party member, right? They took a big swing with this one and gave us an entirely new character that, while present in the original game, was not a playable character. And I think that's incredibly cool, and it shows kind of what the Dragon Quest team is willing to do to, re-envision and reinvigorate, modernize some of the older games in the series. I would love to see the Final Fantasy games, particularly in the earlier Nintendo generations, given this same sort of treatment. Now, some of you might be saying in response to this, but what about the pixel remasters? We just got those not too long ago, right? Final Fantasies 1 through 6 in beautiful HD graphics with updated music and quality of life, and it's fantastic. You're not wrong. Final Fantasy pixel remasters are great, and I think they are currently the best way to play these games, right? There's some features that are not included, like the bonus dungeons in the GBA version of like Final Fantasy VI Advance. Yeah, sure, like those are nice, but as far as the core, experience of playing those original games, this is probably the best way to do it. But they don't count in my mind. They are just not what I'm interested in terms of this sort of a remake. To me, the pixel remasters are like a recent example of Tales of Exilia, the remaster of Tales of Exilia. Like, they're nice, but they're not revolutionary, right? They're not doing anything different. They're not bringing a new creative vision to an existing game. They are more or less faithful recreations of those games. So if the Dragon Quest remakes have been being produced and are getting a lot of really positive buzz, a lot of sales, a lot of great feedback, why hasn't the Final Fantasy series gotten this treatment yet? So I was talking to my friend Abdallah recently. If you haven't followed him on YouTube already, his channel is Abdallah Games. I'll put a link in the description. Go give him a follow. He's great. I was talking to Abdallah about this very subject, and he suggested, well, Yuji Horii is still actively involved with Dragon Quest, and so he is probably the driving creative force behind wanting to do these games, right? He made these games when he was a much, much younger man, and having the ability to take a creation that you made when you were younger and revisit it with all of the years of experience you've gained since then is a cool thing that some creators get a chance to do. And maybe that's why he wants to do that. It's the same sort of thing, right, with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, where some of the core creative people on that team were there for the beginning, right? They made the original game, and now they're revisiting it with all these, years of experience under their belt. So Yuji Horii's still around working on Dragon Quest. Hironobu Sakaguchi is not, right? He has moved on. He created Mistwalker, and they're producing games like Fantasia Neo Dimension, which came out last year. Or was it 2 years ago? I don't know. Time is a flat circle. So without Sakaguchi present at Square Enix, is it just that there's nobody on the team, on the current Final Fantasy team, or even affiliated with that team, that is pushing for that sort of thing? Maybe they just don't find themselves as emotionally attached to those games as some of the people on the Dragon Quest side feel attached to those games. Or it could be that some of the people that are, that would be spearheading this sort of project are tied up with the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. That's entirely possible too. But even without Sakaguchi present at the company and working on these games, what is it exactly that would stop Square Enix from doing it? If they see the success of the Dragon Quest remakes, reimaginings, whatever you want to call them, in HD 2D, why wouldn't they think that a similar method would work on Final Fantasy, right? I know Final Fantasy always kind of ran a close second to Dragon Quest in Japan, but in the West, Final Fantasy has pretty much always been a better selling series, a more beloved series in the West, right? In the West. So it seems like there's a market that would potentially be interested in something like this, especially if you look at the market that has been very accepting of these Dragon Quest remakes, I should say, really remakes. And Sakaguchi doesn't need to be involved. Like, for me, I think that Yuji Horii and his work in Dragon Quest he's a little more of a key component in the creation of Dragon Quest. He's kind of running the show a little more tightly. Sakaguchi, I just have not gotten the impression that he is that he runs the ship the same way that Horii does, right? I could be wrong about that. It's just kind of a vibe thing. But I think that I would like to see the older Final Fantasy games remade by new blood at Square Enix, bring on some of the old people. And honestly, if Sakaguchi, in his capacity working at Mistwalker, wanted to work on the development of these games as well, I would have absolutely no problem with that. Don't get me wrong, Sakaguchi's great. But I'm just saying, whether or not he wanted to be involved with it, I think it would be interesting to see it attempted. So if Wonder of Wonders, we did get Final Fantasy remakes, right? The first 6 games, the classic pixel art games remade, what would I want those to look like? What would we, you and me, want those to look like? Let's talk about that. Final Fantasy I, I think, has the most potential to really blow us away with some new creative ideas, right? So in the original Final Fantasy I on the Nintendo Entertainment System, you are greeted initially by a blue screen with some white text filling you in on a backstory about orbs that lost their light and 4 heroes who showed up at a castle one day holding them, and they're about to go on a big adventure. And then you choose 4 characters. You can set them to whatever class you want. If you want to be a fighter or a thief or a black mage, etc. Create your team, give them names. I think 4 characters is the max in the original Nintendo for what you could name your character, which was rough. There are some 4 character names in English, but fewer than Japanese for sure. So you create your characters and you're off to the races. You begin, you talk to the king, you learn the princess has been kidnapped, you go and you fight Garland, and then you rescue the princess. And a lot of kids my age were like, hey, we just beat the game. That's incredible. No, you didn't beat the game. The big twist is that that's just the intro. That's the prologue. You get across that bridge and the whole game opens up. That's when you see the title screen. You probably played 2 to 3 hours at this point before you've even seen the title screen of the game. It's incredible. I love it. It was such a cool experience as a younger person. But like most JRPGs of its time, your characters were not really characters. They were just little avatars that you moved around the screen and gave orders to in battle in order to progress from place to place to pick up the various MacGuffins that you needed to collect in order to finish the game. Final Fantasy was unique in that it had a little bit more of a story than even like Dragon Quest as a one-to-one comparison had, right? There's weird time travel and robots and crazy things that happen in Final Fantasy, whereas Dragon Quest was even more just straightforward. Go rescue the princess, go kill the Dragon Lord, you did it, I think the way that a Final Fantasy I remake could really do some cool things is by giving us characters, okay? Give us 4 characters and make them distinct. Give them personalities, likes, dislikes, interests, relationships that exist with each other and with other characters in the world. Make them people and give them dialogue. I think that, you should still be able to freely choose what class you want to set your characters as, right? If the main character is Paul, I'm 4 character names, I don't know. If the main character is Paul, the first character on your screen is Paul, I could make Paul a fighter, or I could make Paul a white mage, or I could make Paul a black belt. It shouldn't matter to the character what job class the character has, right? Like, he could still have his own unique personality, but I still get all of the control that I've ever had or ever wanted in choosing how the character is going to play, how the character is going to develop, right? So give us 4 characters, make them interesting. Let us choose their classes, choose their skills, etc. I think there could be a decent amount of expansion on the job system as it exists, right? There's no reason that you couldn't bring in some more elements of the Final Fantasy job system that came about later, right? There's no real reason that you had to keep that from this game if we're reimagining it from the ground up, right? And then with this party of 4 characters that have been written for us to enjoy, we can experience the story in a completely new way, right? Because now it's not just a matter of going from A to B to C to D in order to collect everything and finish the game, but we have characters who can interact with NPCs and each other and react to the situations they find themselves in. Even if we just hit every major story beat of the original game, just by nature of having existing characters with personalities, it's going to feel so much different. It's going to feel so much richer by giving us these characters. So honestly, I think the biggest change that could be made to Final Fantasy I in a remake sort of situation would be to just give us characters. Let the story proceed as it ever has, but give us characters to react and interact during those events. Now, as far as graphical presentation, I don't know exactly how these should look. I mean, I think HD 2D is fine. There's a lot of pushback from people online about HD 2D, how it's been overdone. I feel like some of that is kind of overblown. Like, how many HD 2D games have there really been? Like 8 in the last 10 years. Like, it's not really been overdone. And there's a lot of variation within what we call HD 2D, right? There's the Octopath style, there's the Dragon Quest style. Live Alive had kind of its own distinct spin on it. Star Ocean: The Second Story, R, had its own very different kind of take on HD 2D. It's really just kind of a catch-all term for 2D sprites on like rich 3D backgrounds, which has been a thing since the PlayStation era, right? But just looks a lot better now. So I feel like an HD 2D style done in its own unique way, so it's not just aping Dragon Quest or Octopath Traveler or Live Alive or whatever, could make for a good graphical style. We don't need to completely reinvent the wheel here, because what we're most interested in these sorts of remakes are bringing an interesting new vision to the story and the gameplay. So from a story side, we get characters. From a gameplay side, maybe we get some more integration of job system type elements, right? Maybe you can change your jobs mid-game, or you can learn skills from other characters' jobs or something. I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot that could be done with this kind of outline of a game, right? These older games are really just kind of outlines for games that we would see today, right? There's so much detail, interesting lore that could be filled into that outline to make it a much richer experience, just like Dragon Quest I and Dragon Quest II HD 2D did. I would love to see that for Final Fantasy I. Final Fantasy II is a little bit of a different story. Final Fantasy II had a story, right? It had characters, distinct characters with personalities. It did all of the things that I really wish Final Fantasy I could do. It did them. So it wouldn't require as much of a shift in thinking. It wouldn't require as rich a reimagining as Final Fantasy I. I think giving it the graphical overhaul similar to 1 is a no-brainer. I think adding some more story events, flesh out some backstories on some other characters, give us better dialogue. Obviously, this was a game from the 80s or early 90s. I don't know when it came out in Japan, but very early JRPG, right? So they could do a lot to improve things of that nature, make it a more fun experience from a story perspective. But really, I think the best thing that they could do on top of all that stuff is just continue to refine the gameplay. Final Fantasy II is, I think, jokingly often referred to as like a Saga game by a lot of people online. And they're not wrong. Like, key people on the Saga team worked on Final Fantasy II, and you can see a lot of the ideas that they were working with there show up in the Saga series. And the Saga series is great. I'm not here to like say that the Saga series has bad gameplay and I don't like it. I've had rough experiences with the Saga games, but I've also had really good experiences with Saga games. So I'm not completely against it, but I do think that it sort of sticks out like a sore thumb in the first 6 Final Fantasies. That's not to say that they need to go through, overhaul the gameplay, and make it a clone of the system found in Final Fantasy I. No, I don't think they need to do that at all. But I do think that it would still benefit from further revisions. There's still a level of randomness that I think Final Fantasy series players are not as welcoming of as Saga series players might be. Does that make sense? If I'm going to sit down and play a Saga game, I know what I'm getting into. I know I'm going to randomly learn abilities in the middle of battle. I know my stats are going to increase in ways that don't necessarily make sense to my brain, right? That's just the way it is. That's the way Saga has always been. I can accept that, and I can even sometimes enjoy that. But Final Fantasy players that aren't also Saga fans are really going to have a hard time with that. So refining the gameplay, giving us, elements that tie it more into the Final Fantasy series, I think would go a long way towards making a remake of Final Fantasy II even better. And because there's already a story there, there's not as much detail that can be filled in. It's not as blank of an outline as Final Fantasy I, for sure. But, there is still quite a lot of room in there to flesh out characters and events, right? Like, I don't know if a lot of you are aware of this, but there's a series of novellas that came out and are actually released in America based on Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3. So there are like 3 short novels. Novella is maybe the best word for them. They're definitely not. They're longer than short stories, but they're far shorter than novels. So they're like little novellas. And they kind of go into more detail on each of the first 3 games. I think that's a great starting point if you want to canonize some of those elements in those books. Add those elements into the games as well. Like, there's so much rich lore in the Final Fantasy games that has come about in the years since they were released, right? Very talented writers have taken stabs at these properties and have done really cool things with them. So there's no reason that those can't be worked into the storytelling. Why not? So enrich the story in any way that you can, flesh out the characters more, and refine the gameplay into a form that's going to be a little more digestible by Final Fantasy fans. Final Fantasy III started a early generation trend of Final Fantasies choosing to be gameplay focused over story focused in the odd entries. So 1, 3, and 5 kind of forego rich storytelling in favor of interesting new gameplay mechanics. Final Fantasy III obviously was the introduction of the job system that has been a thing in Final Fantasy now for decades. It's a very much beloved system. Even if I'm not personally the most crazy about it, it is widely beloved in the fandom. So this is the origin of that system. But like I suggested, the storyline really takes a back seat. You are once again in control of essentially 4 nameless characters. They're 4 orphans that are called the Onion Kids for some reason. I don't know. Onion Knights or whatever. Maybe they explain that in the game. I have not played enough of 3 to tell you what that is all about. But I know from reading other criticism online and reading the novella of Final Fantasy III as well, that the storyline of Final Fantasy III is really de-emphasized in favor of the combat mechanics, right? So once again, we're in a situation where we have a ton of potential for a writer or writers to come in and really fill out those details, right? It's got a cool setup, right? They're living on this floating continent and there's this whole world below. Like, there's a lot of really cool stuff that could be done with the story of Final Fantasy III. And the gameplay mechanics on that side of things, like, there's a lot of refinement that could be done there, I'm sure, but not to the level of, what I'm suggesting for Final Fantasy II. The job system is already pretty well established. It wasn't, it's not the final form of the job system in the original Final Fantasy III. So they could incorporate some of those more modern elements of the job system into the Final Fantasy III Remake. I think that makes a ton of sense. Just like they've done with Dragon Quest 1 and 2 and 3, right? Like, the battle system hasn't changed much over the years, but it definitely is more user-friendly, easier to play now than it was back in the old days. So again, overhaul the story, give us more insight into the characters. You can sort of use the 3D or the Nintendo DS Final Fantasy III Remake as a model for that. Like they did at that time, try to create a more interesting, compelling story out of the story of Final Fantasy III by giving us distinct characters in the roles of the Onion Knights. And I think there's debate on how successful that was, but I think that's a decent model to start with and create another HD 2D masterpiece out of Final Fantasy III, just like you do with the other two. Final Fantasy IV, this is where we're getting into the realm of they don't need that much work, in my opinion, to be better, Overhaul the graphics, sure, give us rich, beautiful graphics. There's nothing wrong with the original graphics, and we have the pixel remasters. That's the other thing to keep in mind is like the changes I'm proposing for these games. It's not like the originals or the pixel remasters are going to go away. I don't think that they should be taken off of shelves, George Lucas style, and people prevented from being able to buy them. Absolutely, let's keep those games around, keep them available for people. But, there's no reason that a really cool remake can't coexist with the original game. And so if you have a game like Final Fantasy IV that is beautiful in its own way, right? This early 16-bit pixel art style game, it's beautiful in its own way, but compared to like Dragon Quest II HD 2D, it's lacking in certain areas. So I think a beautiful rendition of the game visually is a no-brainer. Let's just make it even more beautiful. I also think that to kind of maintain the generational leap, I would like to see the graphic style change from 4 on. So 4, 5, and 6, I'd like to see in a different sort of style. It could still be that HD 2D if we're talking about it as like 2D sprites on 3D backgrounds. Something even more rich, right? Something more, I don't know, vivid. I really don't know. Like I would have to see some of, maybe it looks more like Star Ocean than Dragon Quest at that point or something, right? Like something to differentiate it. It's the same sort of thing that I really hope they do. I hope that Dragon Quest IV remake happens, first of all, and that it looks like, HD 2D like 1, 2, and 3 do, because those 4 were on the NES. And then when they remake Dragon Quest V and 6, which I assume / hope that they will, that they do them in a different graphical style to kind of suggest the generational leap that happened between 4 and 5, right? I think that would be cool. I hope that they do that. I think more likely they'll all just be HD 2D, and that's kind of a bummer, but I'm crossing my fingers. Maybe they will. But 4 is pretty solid in terms of story. I think that you could, these were something that's sounds blasphemous to say. I'm going to say it because I think it's true. And I think if your initial reaction to what I'm about to say is to get mad at me, I understand that, but I would just ask that you give it some thought, because I do think it's true, and I don't think it's bad. I just think it's a reality. So a lot of these games in the 8 and 16-bit, even into the 32-bit generation, were written by people who weren't great at writing yet, right? Like a lot of these guys didn't necessarily come from that sort of creative background. They weren't writers to begin with. They kind of stepped into those roles out of necessity in terms of the game they were developing. And so the stories, the dialogue, a lot of these things are just not great. They're like written by amateur writers, right? The world has changed quite a bit. There are, people are joining development teams as writers now. Like you go to school and learn how to write really good, and you go get a job at a game studio and you write stories for games. You write dialogue, right? So it's a different world than it was back then. So the story in Final Fantasy IV is good, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be improved by a writer with more experience and maybe even talent than the original writer had, right? It sounds like blasphemy. I get it. I understand. But I also do, like, as a writer myself, I actually do think that it's true. Like, it's just a reality. It's how craft works. You start out with a craft and you're not good at it. And over time, you get good at it if you keep doing it. And all of these writers have gotten good. Like, I look at the story of Dragon Quest II. I played, I didn't play the original, but I played the Game Boy Color version. And it's good. It's fine. I played the remake, and it brought me to tears. Like some of the scene, like it's just beautifully written, and it's so much deeper and more interesting than the original was. because the people writing it have way more experience writing than they did when the first game was written. I just think that Final Fantasy in general, the early Final Fantasy games could benefit from that. Final Fantasy IV as well, right? There's a lot that I think could be improved. You know, one of the things, and sorry if this is kind of a spoiler, but like so many people die in Final Fantasy IV, but almost none of them actually die, right? Like they have strange contrived ways that everybody comes back. And it feels a little like, you know, an inexperienced writer unwilling to take the plunge and make the sacrifice that's needed for the impact that the story needs to have. It happens, right? That's part of learning to become a writer. I would just love to see the story reconceived maybe. And we don't necessarily need to change it in big ways in terms of the overall plot, but I think that there's a lot that could be done in terms of the character interactions and the dialogue and the individual, you know, story moments that happen along the way through the plot. So, you know, give us some more event scenes, give us full voice acting. Obviously in all these, I should have mentioned, I would love for them all to be fully voice acted, just like the Dragon Quest games. We have a pool of incredibly talented actors, and I think that it makes a ton of sense to just fully bring this series into the modern era this way. Now, Final Fantasy V, like I alluded to earlier, is an odd-numbered Final Fantasy in the early days, and so it is story de-emphasized, gameplay super-emphasized. So we have an even more refined version of the job system here. It's great. It's honestly the first game that I took particular joy in figuring out how to break, you know, like using the systems to just make myself so ridiculously overpowered that I just crushed everything. Like that was a lot of fun. It was fun gameplay, and they should absolutely keep that fun gameplay, tweak it, revise it a little bit as needed. They've come a long way even since then, but largely keep it the same. The story is, it's not very good. It's just kind of boring to me. It just kind of feels like a boring entry in the series. You know, they saw that people liked going to the moon in Final Fantasy IV, and they're like, well, we can do you one better. What if we go to a whole other planet? And that planet is like just like the planet you were on. I don't know. There's some attempts at some interesting ideas, and I think actually they do succeed with some of their ideas. You know, like people traveling through space on meteors. What a cool, weird idea. I hope it's original. I don't know of where they would have stolen that from if it was not original. Feels original. Cool idea. I love that. Some very interesting ideas in this game. Killer evil tree that wants to destroy the universe. Very, very cool. I'm into it. But there's a lot that could be done. You know, this is a game that has a character death that is permanent, that is meaningful. From a gameplay standpoint, though, it kind of loses some of its oomph because that character is immediately replaced by another character who can just do whatever that character did. So you don't really feel the loss on the gameplay side. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I lean towards a bad thing, but I'm open to arguments of why it's a good thing, I guess. There's a lot that could be done in terms of story here to flesh this out, give us just a more compelling plot. I know there's, you know, people love Final Fantasy V, and I love Final Fantasy V. I think it's great as a game. I think it's a great game. I just don't think it's a very good story. So I'd love to see more work done on the story and the characters and their relationships. That would make it just perfect all around. Final Fantasy VI. This is one that I think a lot of people would be like, what can you do to make this game better? To re-envision it in a way that improves it somehow. Like it is as close to perfection as a lot of games have gotten. You know, people hold up Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger as like the generational JRPGs that basically just nailed it. They just did everything right, and they're pretty universally beloved. I do think that Final Fantasy VI could be improved. Like, we could use a few more event scenes, right? Like flesh out some backstories. Like I've said for the other games that are a little more story rich, there's always room to add a little more depth and nuance to characters and scenes and interactions. But honestly, I think that the way the game could be most improved is by strengthening the bonds between the characters as the story goes on. The thing about Final Fantasy VI is that there are a billion playable characters in that game. Like 14, 13, I don't know. There's a lot, but it's a lot, right? You get a lot of characters. And once you start accumulating all of those characters, especially in the second half of the game, the story really kind of takes a back seat, and it's all about these little individual, mini stories that are happening around the world until you all come together and fight the bad guy at the end. And that's cool. I wouldn't necessarily change the structure of that, but the interactions between the characters kind of peter out as the story goes on because it gets so big and there's so many characters, and not every character can be like emotionally invested in every event that happens, right? So you're only going to have a handful of characters. They're going to feel like particularly pertinent to any given moment of the story. So it would be a challenge, I think, but I would love to see the characters in Final Fantasy VI have more opportunities to interact with each other in story sequences, maybe optional sequences that you could seek out. Like, kind of like Octopath Traveler 2 did. I hate to use that as an example because it feels like I'm cheating a little bit, but like, Octopath Traveler 2 would have little mini quests that you could go on with the characters in your party to show them interacting, because in the main story, you're not really getting as much of that interaction between characters. So something like that might be cool to give us those moments that we didn't get in the game. Like, I'd love to see a funny interaction between Realm and Umaro. Like, who doesn't want to see a little artist girl play with a giant gorilla man? Like, that seems fun to me. So yeah, I think the biggest thing that Final Fantasy VI could do is give us more interactions between the characters, more opportunities to see their relationships, because the characters in 6 are so cool, and everybody has their favorites in 6, right? And they all differ. Like, everybody likes different characters, and it's awesome because there are so many cool characters in that game. But I think that there are definitely ways that they could make the experience richer by giving us more time with those characters interacting in fun ways. Also, give us a chance to bring General Leo back. I think everybody would like to have General Leo in their party. Maybe? Anyway, those are my thoughts on how Final Fantasy remakes could make themselves as appealing as the Dragon Quest HD 2D remakes have. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm sure a lot of you, most of you, maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to take the pulse preemptively on the audience reaction to this before I put it up. I feel like most of you are going to be mad that I suggested it. But for those of you who aren't mad, let me know, what you would like to see in this sort of proposed remake of these games. If you are mad, you've already commented and you've probably already left. But if you haven't and you're still here, let me know, why you think it's a bad idea. Let's talk about that down in the comments. Yeah, I think it could be fun. And I like to just fantasize about cool things that could happen. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Thanks to all the subscribers, everybody who's subscribed to the channel. You guys are awesome. It's incredible, frankly. Like, thank you for subscribing and for watching as long as you have. Thank you for commenting and sharing videos with your friends and stuff. Like, it's helped so much. Thank you especially to my channel members who support the channel that way. I really appreciate you guys so much. Feel free, if you'd like to join the channel and jump in our Discord with us and hang out. The button to join is down below. And also, please check out my podcast, the JRPG Pursuit. Every Wednesday, we are putting out new episodes about JRPGs. Love to talk about JRPGs. It's what I do most of my time now. Most of my time that I'm not working at my day job, I'm talking about or playing JRPGs. So why not listen to me talk about JRPGs if you feel like it? Could be fun. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. And until next time, bye.